The clock inside the courtroom continued its steady ticking, marking the moments I wasn't yet ready to face. Instead, I sat motionless in my car, parked just outside, watching raindrops trace mournful paths down the windshield. My chest felt hollow, a void that echoed with every breath, and my hands were cold against the steering wheel. I should have been inside already, confronting the woman I had once placed all my faith in, the one who dismantled my world without a second glance. Imogen, soon to be my ex-wife, was likely seated in that courtroom wearing a look of quiet satisfaction with her new partner by her side. They probably assumed I was too shattered to confront them, that I had given up completely. But they were mistaken. Drawing in a deep, steadying breath, I tried to calm the storm swirling within. This wasn't just about a broken marriage. It was about the pieces of my life I had given away, the time I had invested in a dream that never truly existed. I had spent countless weeks lost in rage, confusion, and heartbreak, trying to untangle how someone who once looked me in the eyes and spoke of love could build a hidden world behind my back. But today marked a shift. I was done drowning in grief. This wasn't just another court date. Today was the beginning of something new, and they had no clue what was coming their way. As my hand gripped the door handle and I stepped into the cool rain, a sensation returned, one I hadn't felt in ages. Control. I walked with purpose into the courthouse, wet footprints trailing behind on the gleaming floor. The building carried a stale scent of disinfectant and old paper, a smell that churned my stomach. My heart beat hard in my chest, not from fear, I had moved past that long ago, but from clarity. I wasn't the same man who had been left behind. I was the man who had finally seen everything clearly. Entering the courtroom, my eyes locked onto Imogen seated at the plaintiff's table. She looked comfortable, casually brushing her hand along the sleeve of the man beside her, Travis. That same arrogant grin played on his face, the one that had haunted me ever since I discovered the truth. He was taller and more solid than I was, but that didn't matter. What did matter was the flicker of recognition in Imogen's eyes when she saw me. For a fleeting moment, her poise wavered, just enough for me to notice. Her confidence wasn't as ironclad as she wanted it to appear. I took my place without acknowledging their whispers or Travis's quiet, smug laugh. I already knew what they were thinking, that I was too damaged to fight back, that I had no strength left. Maybe that was how I seemed back then, just a man crushed under betrayal. But those days were far behind me. The judge's arrival silenced the room. The legal proceedings began, each sentence like a blade slicing through what little remained of our bond. Imogen's attorney painted her as a misunderstood woman who had simply fallen out of love and found happiness elsewhere. I almost chuckled at how neatly they packaged the pain. They always tried to make betrayal sound clean and simple, as if it wasn't a string of deliberate lies spun over months and years. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood, straightened his tie, and delivered the unexpected blow, one neither Imogen nor Travis had anticipated. Your Honor, he began, before we proceed with the financial agreements, I would like to submit some recently discovered evidence. Imogen's head snapped toward me, her expression sharpening. Travis sat up straighter, his posture suddenly tense. They hadn't seen this coming. I leaned back in my chair, lacing my fingers together, watching as the bailiff handed a folder to the judge. Inside were critical documents, financial records, security footage, and proof of the double life they had built together while I remained blind in my loyalty. These weren't just papers. They were truth, cold and undeniable. And they changed the entire trajectory of the case. Imogen started to say something, but her attorney touched her wrist, signaling her to stay quiet. It was already too late. The impact had begun to ripple through the room. The judge slowly sifted through the documents, the air thick with tension. Imogen's polished composure began to unravel. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't losing, I was finally gaining ground. The judge's face remained unreadable, but Imogen had grown visibly pale, and Travis? His signature smirk had completely vanished. Now he leaned forward, his confidence melting away, replaced by a creeping unease. I could almost hear their thoughts spinning. How much did I know? What else had I uncovered? Silence dominated the room, broken only by the occasional rustling of paper and the steady tick of the courtroom clock. My attorney sat with a composed demeanor, fingers interlaced neatly on the table, silently waiting for the moment when the judge would finally lift his gaze and recognize the shift that had just occurred. When it happened, it was like watching the first domino fall in a carefully arranged line. The judge looked up and addressed Imogen's lawyer, his tone steady but firm. "Mr. McAllister," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he glanced toward the increasingly uneasy attorney, "it appears your client failed to disclose specific financial assets prior to these proceedings. These documents show substantial withdrawals from a joint account shared with the defendant." The funds seemed to have been rerouted into another account registered under Mr. Travis Langley. At that, Imogen's body went rigid while Travis exhaled sharply, clearly caught off guard. I remained completely still, offering no visible reaction. Instead, I let the truth drift over them like a dense fog they couldn't escape. Imogen slowly turned to her lawyer, her voice low and trembling with apprehension. "What does he mean?" she asked, panic creeping into her words. Her lawyer paused uncomfortably before responding. We weren't made aware of these documents," he replied, his voice uncertain. Imogen opened her mouth, seemingly ready to protest or challenge the claim, but something stopped her. She recognized it. This wasn't just another accusation she could manipulate into her favor. This was undeniable. This was fact, evidence that couldn't be spun into a version where she came out the innocent party. Meanwhile, Travis leaned back with crossed arms, trying to appear unfazed. Yet the tightness around his jaw betrayed his real feelings. He had believed without question that they had played their hand flawlessly, assuming I would simply accept whatever they offered. But this turn of events was something he hadn't accounted for. The judge continued with measured gravity. "These transactions indicate a deliberate effort to divert marital assets prior to the finalization of the divorce. If these claims are substantiated, there could be significant legal consequences." That was my cue. I finally spoke, keeping my voice calm and deliberate, though my emotions were swirling just beneath the surface. "Your Honor, there's more to consider." I nudged another folder across the table. My lawyer took it and handed it over to the bailiff. It held additional documentation, records of hotel reservations. Dozens of them going back several years. Some were in Imogen's name. Others listed Travis. A few used fabricated identities, yet all were linked to their personal email accounts. The sound of Imogen's breath catching was loud in the silence that followed. Travis shifted uncomfortably once again. They had always believed they were cautious, that they had built a hidden life no one could expose. But the truth had a way of seeping through even the smallest cracks. The judge exhaled slowly, adjusting his glasses as he took in the new information. "Mr. McAllister, I'll need a few moments to review these materials before moving forward." Imogen's eyes darted toward me. And in that moment, real fear appeared on her face, not fear for our marriage, which had died the moment she chose betrayal, but fear of the consequences that now loomed large before her. Travis muttered something under his breath and cast a bitter look in my direction, but I ignored him. He wasn't the one who mattered. Imogen was the one facing reality now. She had laughed earlier that morning. She had walked into the courtroom with a confident smile, assuming I would roll over, sign whatever they presented, and let them take everything. But that smile had vanished. I watched the panic deepen in her features, settling into her expression like permanent ink staining fabric, something that could never be scrubbed clean. Beside her, Travis fidgeted, his jaw clenched and fists pressing against the table. He wasn't accustomed to defeat, and it showed. But this time he didn't have an escape. Neither of them did. The outcome had already shifted. As the judge flipped through page after page, his expression hardened. It was clear that what he saw disturbed him. He didn't appreciate the deception, the manipulation disguised as a failed relationship. And I understood that feeling all too well. Imogen leaned in close to her lawyer, whispering furiously. I couldn't make out her words, but I didn't need to hear them. I had spent years reading her, watching her when she felt cornered. I had seen that exact desperation before when I first confronted her, when she twisted my discovery of her betrayal into an accusation against me, trying to paint herself as the victim. She had always been skilled at dodging blame, constructing fragile stories in which she appeared misunderstood. But that skill was failing her now. The lies had gone too far, and the cracks in her story had widened into gaping holes. Travis, though, was a different story. He wasn't prepared for this kind of scrutiny. The subtle bouncing of his leg, the restless twitch of his fingers, it all revealed the pressure he wasn't equipped to handle. He wasn't concerned with justice or consequences. He feared the loss. He feared that everything they had built together, their illusion, was now collapsing in this courtroom. The judge finally lowered the papers with a sigh. Mrs. Langley, he said, fixing her with a stern look, do you have any response to these allegations? Imogen parted her lips, hesitated, then closed them again. She looked toward Travis as if searching for strength before turning back to the judge. Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't know about those transfers. I never took any funds. At that moment, my lawyer stepped in with smooth precision. Your Honor, he said, we have bank records that clearly state otherwise. The financial records were undeniably tied to her login details. These weren't random mistakes, they were deliberate. The courtroom was so quiet I could pick up the faint buzz of the overhead lights. All eyes had shifted to her, waiting for her response. But really, what could she possibly say? The facts were stark and irrefutable, printed in black and white. No lie could smudge that truth. Travis let out a sharp exhale through his nose, clearly growing impatient. "So what?" he muttered, scoffing while shaking his head. "What do you even want? This is just bitterness, man. You lost. Let it go." I turned and looked directly at him, finally giving him my undivided attention. For countless months, I'd imagined what this exact moment would be like, not some childish fight at a bar, not a heated phone call, but this. Right here, where truth actually mattered and the fallout couldn't be ignored. "You really think this is about losing?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. "You think this is all about you?" Travis leaned back, an arrogant grin tugging at his lips. "Isn't it?" A low chuckle escaped me as I shook my head slowly. "No, this is about her. The woman who told me for years that she loved me while behind my back she was taking what didn't belong to her. The same woman who made plans with me while secretly making others with you. The one who convinced me I was the issue when she was the one weaving lies." I tilted my head, allowing the weight of my words to settle over him. "And I don't think you've really taken a second to understand what that means for you." For the first time I saw a flicker of hesitation in Travis' expression. Deep down, he knew. If she was capable of betraying someone she once promised forever to, someone she'd built a life with, then what was stopping her from turning around and doing the same thing to him? What would stop her from cleaning out his accounts or pretending to care while secretly investing her time in someone else? Imogen inhaled sharply, her gaze darting toward Travis as though she could physically see his mind processing everything. She reached out to grab his hand, but he recoiled. A tense silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. In that moment, a realization washed over me. This loss wasn't mine. It was theirs. I had always imagined betrayal to be like a sledgehammer, sudden and devastating. But I had been mistaken. It was more like gradual decay, a slow crumbling of everything I believed in, piece by piece, until only dust remained. And here, in this very courtroom, I was witnessing that final collapse. Imogen sat rigidly beside her attorney, the polished image she had walked in with beginning to unravel. Gone was the self-assured look of someone who believed they'd already won. Replacing it was something far more vulnerable, fear. Travis now sat with his arms crossed, leaning back in frustration. His mouth was a thin line, his body language shouting disappointment not toward me but toward her. The doubt had taken root, slowly infecting everything he believed about her. "I just don't get it," he muttered, shaking his head. "You said." He didn't finish. It was as if even he couldn't stomach hearing the rest out loud. Imogen turned sharply toward him, her eyes wide and warning. "Travis, don't." "Don't what?" His voice snapped across the room like a whip. "Don't ask questions? Don't search for answers? Because honestly, I don't even know what's real with you anymore." The tension between them crackled with unspoken accusations. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't the one bearing the brunt of that anger. The judge cleared his throat, redirecting attention to the bench. "Let's move forward," he said, his tone composed but resolute. "Mr. Langley, were you aware of these transactions?" Travis hesitated for a moment, then let out a breath. "No. I didn't know anything about them." Imogen's head whipped around toward him, and the panic on her face was impossible to miss. She had expected to see me beaten down, walking in as the loser. What she hadn't counted on was the facade falling apart, not just in front of me, but before the one person she needed most. "You knew about some of it," she mumbled under her breath. "But it was too late." Travis heard her. "So did the judge. And I definitely did." He looked stunned, his eyebrows knitting together. "Wait, what do you mean I knew about some of it?" She offered no reply. She didn't have to. The damage had been done. Her lawyer shifted in his seat, clearly sensing that the direction of the hearing was no longer in their favor. Whatever strategy they had brought with them was quickly unraveling. "Your Honor, may I request a short recess so my client and I can—" "No," Imogen's voice cut him off with a startling sharpness. For a moment, everyone in the room froze. Even Travis looked taken aback. "I won't sit here and let him," she spat, jabbing a finger in my direction, every word laced with venom, "make me out to be some kind of criminal. This wasn't just any marriage, it was our marriage. And he had shattered it long before I had ever." "Before you what, Imogen?" I cut in, my tone steady and composed, though a storm brewed underneath. "Before you began lying? Before you started taking what wasn't yours? Before you," I motioned toward Travis, who sat frozen, eyes fixed on her as though finally seeing her true self. "Before you decided to swap me out like I was nothing?" Her lips sealed tight. And then, in an instant, the dam gave way. Travis shoved his chair back with such force that the screeching legs echoed across the room. He didn't even glance in my direction. His focus remained solely on her, the woman he had chosen, the woman he thought he had secured. And in that single moment, realization struck him like lightning. Regret washed over his face, clear as day. I can't believe this, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. I gave up everything for you. Imogen's face contorted in annoyance. Travis, stop being so dramatic. Dramatic? His laugh was bitter and sharp, more a bark than anything. You played me. Just like you played him. Watching it unfold felt surreal. I had spent so many months drowning in heartbreak, buried beneath betrayal and loss. But now? It was no longer me crumbling. It was her. Travis charged toward the exit, slamming the courtroom doors so forcefully they banged against the walls. And for the first time since all this chaos began, Imogen looked utterly diminished, small and aimless. As for me, I had never felt lighter. For what seemed like forever, I had convinced myself I needed closure. I had imagined confronting her 1,000 times, dreamed of that moment when the truth would slice through her web of deception. But the reality? It was nothing like the fiery climax I'd expected. It was still. Icy. Imogen remained frozen in her seat, eyes locked on the doors that had just swallowed Travis. Her world had been flipped upside down, and now she was beginning to understand she wasn't in control anymore. Her hands curled into fists on the table, and when she finally turned to face me, her look was unreadable. Yet I saw something buried deep in her eyes, beneath the fury and bitterness. It was fear. The judge cleared his throat, piercing through the heavy silence. Mrs. Langley, do you wish to continue, or would you prefer a moment to collect yourself? She straightened, pulling composure around her like a coat. I'm fine, she replied smoothly. But she was far from it. Cracks had begun to show. Her attorney fumbled with his documents, clearly trying to recover. Your Honor, my client disputes the earlier financial allegations. There are explanations for the transactions, and we are prepared to provide them. My lawyer didn't let the moment slip. Her voice was sharp and unwavering. Interesting. Because from what we can see, it appears your client funneled funds from my client's accounts into a separate private account. One that just so happens to link directly to Mr. Langley. Imogen's mouth formed a tight line, her lips turning pale. She knew there was no escape. The evidence wasn't just compelling, it was indisputable. The judge exhaled heavily and rubbed his forehead. Mrs. Langley, I advise you to take these claims seriously. If the discrepancies cannot be justified, it will greatly affect asset distribution. For a fleeting second, I thought she might crack, might finally take ownership of her actions. Perhaps even show a shred of regret. But that wasn't who Imogen was. Instead, she leaned into her lies. I didn't take anything, she said, her voice unnaturally calm. Those funds were used for personal needs fully within my rights. Travis wasn't involved. The boldness of it nearly made me laugh. Even now, she was desperately trying to twist the truth. Then why was Mr. Langley's name on that account? My attorney asked smoothly. Silence filled the courtroom. Imogen's lawyer leaned close, whispering urgently. But I had already disengaged. I didn't care anymore. The victory wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the legal outcome. It was about this moment. The moment she realized her lies had lost their power. She had nothing left to spin, no more threads to pull. The judge gave a light tap of his gavel. We'll take a brief recess before we continue with the asset division. Both parties must remain in the courthouse. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted, but not in Imogen's favor. She rose slowly from her chair, her fingers twitching slightly. I could see the thoughts rushing through her, her mind scrambling for a strategy. Then she turned to me, her expression sharpening. You believe you've won? I met her eyes, calm and unshaken. It's not a belief. It's a fact. For a long, tense pause, she didn't say another word. She simply stared as if she were truly seeing me for the very first time. With a swift intake of breath, she pivoted on her heels and strode away, the sound of her shoes tapping rhythmically on the glossy courthouse floor. I didn't watch her leave, I was finished with that. The hallway ahead felt endless and vacant as I moved forward, the soft echo of each step fading behind me. The break had allowed others a moment to collect themselves, to regroup. But I didn't need a pause. I had already uncovered what I came for: closure. Not the kind wrapped in apologies or last-minute explanations, but the kind that settles quietly in your soul, letting you know you've already turned the page. Imogen, on the other hand, hadn't reached that place. She lingered near a set of tall windows, arms folded tightly, her posture rigid. The late afternoon sun cast narrow beams across the tiles, slicing through the space and stretching her shadow in a way that made her seem more like a figure on the verge of unraveling. I knew she was waiting, even before her voice broke the silence. Are you happy now? She asked, her tone low but edged with fury. I stopped several paces away, leaving room between us. I'm not sure happy is the right word, I replied honestly. But I'm at peace. And that's something I haven't felt in a long time. Her jaw clenched. You embarrass me in there. I gave a slight nod, tilting my head. That wasn't me. You did that yourself. I only brought the truth to the surface. She shifted her stance, clearly agitated. You could have just walked away. There was no need to turn it into a public display. A hollow laugh slipped from me, void of amusement. You mean like how you walked away from our marriage? Or the spectacle you made of it when you decided to sneak around behind my back? Her expression darkened. Her fingers dug into her arms as though trying to hold herself together. For years I had been the one walking on eggshells, trying to preserve something that was already shattered. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. You can't paint yourself as the victim, Imogen, I said, my voice calm but firm. Not after everything you've done. She let out a sharp exhale, her eyes drifting past me as if searching for a way out. But no exits could undo the choices that brought us here. I half expected another round of excuses, some fresh twist to the story to make herself the misunderstood one. But she didn't go there. Instead, her posture sagged ever so slightly, and the fire in her gaze flickered. There was something else now, something I hadn't seen in her for a long time. Defeat. I didn't think it would end like this, she murmured. And for once I believed her. She had thought she would walk away the victor, arms full with a new life, a new relationship, and the comfort of thinking she had left me broken. But here she stood, alone, watching the aftermath of her own decisions settle around her. I didn't think so either, I admitted. But we don't always get to choose how it ends. She swallowed, her eyes blinking rapidly as though fighting to keep her composure intact. What happens now? She asked. That was the question, what now? Now, I return home without the burden of a failed marriage weighing me down. Now, I move forward without constantly wondering if I should have done something different. Now, I finally get the freedom to live on my own terms, free from the sting of betrayal that had been a constant companion. But I didn't say all that out loud. Instead, I looked at her one last time, this woman I had once deeply loved and trusted. And then I released her from my heart. That's no longer something I have to worry about, I said plainly, turning to leave. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't look back. The heavy doors closed behind me, sealing off a chapter of my life that no longer had a place in my future. The sky had cleared since the morning, the thick clouds had broken apart, allowing golden rays of sunlight to spill across the pavement like a promise. I drew in a long breath, the air feeling lighter, less burdened. It was finally over. For months I had envisioned this day. I expected bitterness or perhaps sorrow. But standing there now as life continued to move around me, I felt something else entirely: relief. A steady warmth filled my chest, the kind that told me I had made it through. I made my way toward the car, my thoughts still and calm for the first time in what seemed like ages. No more endless mental reruns of conversations, no more dwelling on what could have gone differently. No more nights lying awake, trying to understand how someone could betray the love they once promised. I was past it. I no longer cared. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from my attorney or some final legal reminder. But the screen lit up with a familiar name, Miriam. A smile touched my lips. Miriam had always been there, long before this mess began. A true friend, never judgmental, never pushing me to feel anything I wasn't ready to. She never treated me like I was broken. We met years ago, back when life felt simple, when love was still untouched by pain. And through the darkest parts of my journey, she had remained my constant, a quiet reminder that I was more than the scars I carried. I opened the message. It's done, right? How do you feel? I took one final look at the courthouse before I answered. There was a lightness inside me now, a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in ages. Her message popped up almost right away. Good. You deserve that. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly believed those words. Sliding into the driver's seat, I turned the key. The car came to life with a steady purr, reliable, grounded, just like I felt in that moment. As I pulled away from the courthouse, my mind didn't drift to Imogen. I didn't wonder about her choices, her whereabouts, or the weight of any regrets she might be carrying. That wasn't mine to hold anymore. My focus shifted to the road ahead, a path that finally belonged to me. And for once, I wasn't moving toward a conclusion. I was driving straight into something new.